Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Middlesex County Council Tuesday, March 8th, 2022. It's 10 a.m. and we're here for the 2022 budget meeting. And to call this meeting to order, I would like to say that the Middlesex County Budget Committee prepared a budget that was both responsible and reflective of the current economic environment. The ongoing COVID-19 pandemic has put unusual pressures on the county and our local municipalities. The recommended budget translates to a 0% tax levy increase. In 2021, County Council adopted a renewed strategic plan titled the Middlesex Initiative, Breaking New Ground. The 2022 budget aligns with the 4 areas of strategic focus, which include cultivating community vitality, connecting through infrastructure, strengthening our economy, and promoting service excellence. Highlights of the budget include investments to support a comprehensive communication strategy, establishing a centralized procurement office, and continuing to invest in organizational capacity in the areas of economic development, human resources, planning, and information technology services. The budget continues to focus and enhance our core services and make significant investments in long-term care, land ambulance, and transportation infrastructure. Middlesex County is seeing continued significant growth and demographic changes. This budget is designed to support our communities in the long term, ensure that the county continues to be innovative, and provide services that are of excellent value to our residents and businesses. Now, I'd just like to ask if anybody has any disclosure of pecuniary interest. Seeing none, we're going to continue on with our first presentation of the day, and that's the Middlesex London Health Unit 2022 budget presentation. And I would like to welcome Emily Williams, the CEO of the Middlesex London Health Unit. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here with you this morning. I am joined by Dave Jansoon, he's the Assistant Director of Finance at the Middlesex London Health Unit, who will provide a presentation this morning, an overview of the MLHU draft budget for 2022. This was approved by our Finance and Facilities Committee last Thursday and will proceed for final approval to the next Board of Health meeting, which is next Thursday, March 17th. Both Dave and I would be pleased to answer any questions you may have. You will note this year in our budget, we have attempted to provide a bit more specificity to the county, as well as our other funding agencies in terms of separating out instances of revenue to improve transparency to our funders, and also to improve our reporting of expenses against those funding sources. You will also see that we have included, as with last year, COVID extraordinary expenses. That includes our case and contact management, as well as the vaccine program, and new this year, an opportunity to provide services in the form of recovery to the community of London. So Dave is going to provide the detail, and we'll be happy to answer any questions, as I say, at the conclusion of the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Emily. Appreciate that. Okay, good morning, Mayor, councillors, any staff participating, and members of the public. Thank you for having us here today, and we're going to take you through our 2022 budget. Next slide, please. So this slide here really attempts to section off our $65 million of funding. You can see here that the ministry provides about 84% of that funding. The city and county together provide about 14%. We do get some small amounts of funding from the public health of both Canada and Ontario. And the health unit does generate some miscellaneous revenue through its own client services. Next slide, please. So the ministry asked us to move the budget preparation up by about 5 to 6 weeks this year, which put us under a little bit of pressure to get it done. But we did adopt these procedures for putting together our 2022 budget. Everything was built from the 2021 budget. And where we could, we did do some zero-based budgeting on a few different things, which I'll point out along the way. Salaries and wages, there was a very detailed analysis done in 2021 from a zero-based point of view. We did look at our inflation and any step increases that were applicable. That developed our 2022 baseline. We then added board-approved PBMA initiatives and any special projects that we had slated for 2022 to arrive to total salaries and wages. Benefits, we were able to negotiate with Canada Life, our insurer, prior to the budget. So those rate increases are in this budget. General expenses included a thorough review of all of those accounts where we looked at 4 years of actuals and 4 years of budget. We respectfully challenged one another and tried to reduce those costs where applicable, but while still running the business. Extraordinary expenses, as Emily had pointed out, we do have a vaccine budget, case and contact management budget, and a recovery budget. It's something new this year. And we did bridge using a budgeted gap, which we can chat about a little bit later. So next slide, please. I wanted to include this slide because we do have a second company. It's really 5 different programs running with different fiscal year from April to March. The health unit does run from January to December. However, these 5 programs are fiscal April to March. These 5 programs are 100% funded. And by that, I mean funding does equal total expenditures. There is about $3 million spread across these 5 programs. And therefore, the net impact to the main budget is 0. There's no surplus, no deficit. Next slide, please. Okay, this is our salaries and wages summary where we bridge from 2021 to 2022. And if you could press next 4 times, please. Okay, perfect, thank you. Usually I would do that through the presentation. So when we looked at inflation, we obviously mirrored our contractual obligations. So that 345,000 it does represent our contractual obligations. PBMA incremental. So really this is our board approved initiatives that we reviewed last October and November. They were passed by the board. And they do include an FTE increase of 4.5. And the FTE count is there. This year, something new is special projects. The ministry is allowing us to submit those expenses, not necessarily approved yet, but we are submitting. So that's really looking at our emergency medical records software implementation. And that project has an FTE of 2.0. City of London, this is really a flow through. It has no impact. It's here to reconcile the total salaries. You will see this pop up here a few times, but the expenses are netted out against increased funding. Next slide, please. So this is our next section on our statement would be the benefits section. Again, bridging from 2021 to 2022. Could you please press forward 3 times? Okay, thank you. So the increases, our benefits are provided through 2 separate policies. One is a premium based, and that covers life, accidental death and dismemberment, and long-term disability. We did see an increase there of about $102,000 across the organization. And the additional increases come through our ASO policy, which is really the administrative services only, covering extended healthcare and dental. And we did see significant increases in that area as well. Benefits related to the incremental PBMA initiatives are also included there. Again, the City of London, the CLIF program, which is, I should have mentioned earlier, but CLIF is our, oh gosh, Emily, can you help me?
cannabis and tobacco enforcement. Yes.
Yes, thank you. So that's our cannabis tobacco enforcement program. Next slide, please. Our general expenses, again, bridging from 2021 to 2022. This slide's quite interesting because I've broken down the corporate expenses and general increases. On the surface, this looks, I know when Emily and I first looked at it, we went, wow, this is quite an increase. But if you can press forward 3 times, please. Thank you. So when we looked at corporate expenses of the $243,000 increase, $138,000 of that was to align retiree benefits to actual spending. In the last 3 years, the budget has been held static, and this year we took the opportunity and basically made the budget align with actual spending. We do have smaller maintenance projects scheduled for Strathroy and City Plaza. They're very small. It's like repairing floors and stuff like that. $51,000, there's 6 projects there. And our insurance, general liability and cyber insurance, we saw a $29,000 increase there. Now, general expenses, the $449,000 increase, out of that, $342,000 has no impact. Emily and I are trying to bring more transparency to our budget, and these expenses are simply flow through. So where there is an increase in expense, there is an offsetting increase in revenue or funding. So out of the 449, 342 really has no impact. That leaves us a balance of only $107,000, which was directly related to increases through Microsoft for our software. PBMA incremental increases, working with our insurer. We are withdrawing from our ASO reserves $150,000 to put that balance where it needs to be. And we do have offsetting $4,000 of miscellaneous expenses. Next slide, please. So this is our extraordinary expenses. I'm sorry, I can't see the slide number, so I'm not sure. Can you press forward 1 time, please? And 1 more, and 1 more. Okay, thank you. Our vaccine budget was extremely difficult to budget. As you can imagine, this is where our vaccination clinics, all the administration costs and operating costs for those clinics reside. What we did here was we looked at the vaccine actual cost for 2021, and we're budgeting at 75% of that. Case and contact management is the other expense. This was a zero-based budget built up using 14 board-approved PBMA initiatives that were approved last November. And the recovery is a new option for us from the ministry, where we can look at activities that are backlogged. This recovery cost is created from 16 initiatives employing an FTE of about 18 people. School focused nurses initiative, $726,000 there. That is a flow through as well. Those expenses are offset 100% with funding. Next slide, please. So the budgeted gap, I think this is called different things depending on what you're accustomed to. I've seen it called a controller's override, like budgeted gap. Basically, it's to balance the budget. And balanced by that, I mean funding equals expenses with no surplus, no deficit. So you can see here in 2021, our budgeted gap was 1.2 million. In 2022, there was a slight increase up to 1.6 million. We are confident we will deliver on this budget. As you can imagine, we do budget at full complement. So our budget is constructed that each staff member is working from January to December. It doesn't take into account delays in filling vacancies, so that will go against this gap. Likewise, new hires usually start at a lower pay band, and staff being redeployed to COVID when programs are delayed with restarting. We're very confident we'll be able to cover this gap. Some of this gap is inherent with the absence of inflationary compensation for the ministry. We've been held fairly static for the last 3 years, and the ministry has not adjusted funding for compensation or for inflation. So some of that adjustment year over year is showing up in the 1.6 as well. Next slide, please. This slide is fairly busy, but I did want to give you a full view of our funding. You can see there the ministry provides about $52 million, and that does include COVID and special projects and 100% funded programs. The City of London and the County of Middlesex are in there. We do receive funding from various agencies, and we do generate some miscellaneous revenue ourselves through some of our services that we offer. Total funding this year is $65 million. Forward ones, please. This year, the ministry did ask us to budget with a 1% increase, which we did. You can see the about $200,000 increase on that line. And we do want to bring attention to the fact that we are receiving mitigation funding in 2022 for $1.3 million. That number has been static for the last few years. There is a risk of that going away in 2023, which would present a challenge for us of almost $1.4 million. I think that's the last slide, but next slide, please. Oh, there is one more. We thought it was important to show the consolidated view. We've seen a lot of numbers here now. For us accountants, I guess it's fine, but there is a lot of numbers here. So this is a consolidated view. Salaries and wages, we're running about $21 million with benefits at 5. Anyone interested, that is about a 25% benefit rate. It's a little bit lower than what we usually see. Usually we see about a 26% benefit rate, but that's representative of the number of contract staff that we have helping during COVID. General expenses are 8.6 million. Extraordinary expenses, which by the way are 98% salaries, wages, and benefits are 28.8 million. And we are reducing those expenses by the gap of 1.6 to show a balanced budget of total 65.3 million. Next slide, please. And that does conclude. If anyone has any questions, that would be great. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Emily, and thank you, Dave, for going through that with us. I'm just going to ask Council now if you have any questions. Councillor Burghardt-Jessen, you're first.
See if this works. I'll be the guinea pig to use this system for the first time. Thank you. And through the warden, I want to thank you for your presentation. It's too bad that we can't meet in person, but hopefully the next time that you come to visit us and share with us your investments and programs that you're going to be having in Middlesex, that we can do that in person and actually meet you face to face. Just a couple questions, and you kind of touched on the one that one that stood out. I mean, this CLIF program, the funding that you get from the city, and I gathered it's strictly an in and an out. So it's whatever money, and for whatever reason the city is giving you this money, then it's looking after something, and so it's an in and an out. There's no expense that we're responsible for because they're giving you money?
Through the warden, that's correct. It is to cover our increasing number of cannabis retailers and the associated inspections required for those. So it is direct funding equals expenses, all from the City of London.
Okay, thank you. And then just, I guess I'm looking for a little bit more information on this second company and the structure behind that and why the need to set up a second company. I don't quite understand that. And then I do have some questions on the salaries and just wondering what your salary increase is for the cost of living for 2022. I don't know if I caught that in the slides that were presented, and particularly the non-union number, just wondering what you are budgeting for. And then if I heard you correctly and if I understood, it looks like when it comes to your salaries, you're budgeting for a full year, even though you know that you're not going to have a full year of that expense. And with that in mind, you're budgeting for a planned surplus.
Through the warden, very good questions. The second company is there to have this separate fiscal years. So the health unit runs January to December on our main company, and those 5 programs are funded from April to March, and their fiscal year is April to March, with a full set of financial statements audited prepared on that company. Your second question was cost of living increases. It was 1.7% according to our contracts. And yes, although it hasn't been approved, we did slate the same increase for salary staff. Your third question was around the budgeting for a full year. Yes, that is a fairly typical way that we build the budget. Next year, however, we will be doing more deeper dive into this, especially on the salary side. Notwithstanding, there was a lot of work done in 2021, so we did build from 2021 in order to hit that 5 and 6 week expedited required submission to the ministry.
And through the warden, if I may add, just that the full year of staffing budget, we've also incorporated that gap that Dave reviewed in terms of the 1.6. So we have planned the year full staffing for the year, but any overstaffing would have to address that gap first, the $1.6 million gap, before we would see any surplus. And it would be our plan, as with this year, that if there was any surplus, we would return that to the respective municipalities as we did in 2021.
Councillor Vanderheyden.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for the good work that you've done. I know you've been working flat out for the last 2 years, as have all of us, but it's called a team working for our citizens. A couple of questions. One is on the vaccine budget. Now, do you take the vaccine budget away from your regular operating and programming budget? Because that was something that's you only had for the last 2 years and partly into this year. So those numbers, if I read correctly, was just over 28 million on your line budget for each of the last 2 years. And you said something about 75% of actuals. So I'm trying to figure out what the government gave you in order to cover the COVID costs, because they were above and beyond what your regular costs are. So that's the first context of my first question. And I'll save the other 2 questions for after that answer because they're a little complicated.
Okay, thank you. Through the warden. So the vaccine budget, so the way that it's working, and it did work this way in 2021, although we're still closing the year, but we did receive direction from the ministry that if a surplus was generated from mandatory programs, that surplus would be redirected to cover COVID costs and efforts. So we're seeing that in 2021. And we are budgeting in 2022 for the same thing to happen. The funding for COVID expenses, the 28 million that you mentioned, yes, if we do spend our mandatory program budget, then we are hopeful that the ministry will provide that $28 million to cover those expenditures. But if we do generate a surplus on mandatory programs, we will be asked, the same as 2021, to redirect that surplus to cover COVID expenses. And then the ministry will reduce our funding for COVID expenses.
Okay, thank you for that. I also wanted to ask about the extraordinary costs. That's a line item underneath your expenses for salaries and et cetera. So what would that pertain to, extraordinary costs? It's just an unusual label.
Through the warden, excuse me, those are our COVID costs. We've labeled them as extraordinary expenses. That's the terminology that the ministry uses. So they include our case and contact management, our vaccine program, as well as our recovery costs. And this year they invited us to apply for funding to support the implementation of our electronic medical record. So we did apply for 2.0 full-time equivalents under that project as well. We would not proceed to fill those until we had assurance of the funding. Okay,
so if I'm clear, it's listed in two spots, but you're not double putting in the $28 million for the okay. My last question has to do with the shared library services, and they're 100% funded, so that's not a real issue, but it kind of explain what shared library services would be.
Thank you. Through the warden, we serve as a regional hub for public health agencies in our region, so they can request support. MLA2 has librarian staff, and they support with literature reviews or sharing evidence across health units. So other health units can make requests into our library, and we provide that service. As noted, it's 100% funded.
Okay. Any other questions, Council? No, seeing none. Well, then I would like to thank you, Emily and Dave, for coming this morning and going through that so well for us. And we look forward to seeing you at a later date, just like we said, in person sometime.
Thank you, Warden. It was a pleasure to be here this morning.
It was. Thank you.
Okay, so moving on now to the 2022 budget presentation. And Cindy, I think the floor is yours, and I think it's going to be yours for quite a long time.
So everybody can hear me okay? Figuring out where to put this mic. So good morning, council, staff, and the community. I'll be presenting the budget for 2022. Greg, can you put the presentation up? Thank you. Next. So the budget presentation will walk through a number of items. This is the budget agenda. So we will start by looking at definitions, talk a little bit about COVID-19 and the impact it's had on the budget, really back from 2020, 21, and 22. Tie the budget into the strategic plan, the budget process. We'll walk through that. We'll walk through, well, you heard the introduction from the warden. The budget committee recommendations. The budget committee met 5 times, lots of really wonderful discussions. So we'll hear the recommendations there. And then we also have the 2022 Middlesex County budget for each one of the departments. I've kind of gone through each one of the presentations and kind of done a snapshot on this presentation, consistent with what I did last year. Just before you warn you, in case you see at the bottom, there is 100 slides, but I'll try to go through some of them pretty fast. It's very similar presentation to what I did last year. It seemed to work on a Zoom kind of hybrid model. So next. After the presentation that I do, each one of the department budgets will be pulled up and the budget heads will answer any questions that council has of them. Next. Oh, sorry, keep it there. Thanks. So of course, the county tax levy is added to the tax bill in each area municipality and then transferred to the county from the 8 local municipalities. And I have the logo of all of them up there. Next. So the next 2 slides, there's one on demographics and then there's one on the census. It's really important to look at both the census and the demographics to see how our community is growing and changing. And of course, as we grow, the community expects additional program and services. So I think our budget reflects that and is also thinking more long-term and where the community is moving. Next. So here's the census. This is new information. I think you heard Dirk from planning present this at the last council meeting. We see a significant increase in the population in the county. If you look at the census from 2016 to the census of 2021, and if you look at the big ones, we see Strathroy Caradoc there at over 14%. And we also see Lucan, which is at over 20%. These are huge increases in our population. Although I have to say from budgeting point of view, that's great because that's new assessment. We see new growth and obviously we see new dollars, both at the county level and the local level. Next. Organization chart. There have been no changes from last year, but this just gives a general idea of all the different departments. You can see Middlesex County Council, and then we have our CAO, Bill Rayburn, which is over here, and then each one of the different department areas. And then of course, the land ambulance is on the bottom as the authority board. Next. So you're going to see throughout the presentation, consistent with last year, we try to pull up pictures of the county. And obviously, I think this is one of my favorite ones. And I tried to really make sure I spread them throughout the 8 local municipalities. So next. Each year, we always kind of look at these definitions. So of course, there's levy, there's tax rate, there's real growth, and reassessment growth. And of course, levy is when we're talking about how much do we have to levy from our local municipalities in order to cover the County of Middlesex budget. If the County of Middlesex budget goes up, well, we have a couple options. One is we can look at increasing taxes. We can obviously apply the new growth, which is what we have done in the last few years. And this budget is looking at that as well. We can use reserves. And we can do a combination of all of those. And you're going to see when we get to the budget recap, we've done that this year as well. And the real growth is the one that in the last few years, we've been lucky at the Middlesex County. I talked about the census and the growth. Obviously, the real growth and the dollars coming to the county continues to increase year by year. And I really expect by all the building that I see going on, I think of Mount Bridges. Every time I drive by there, I see a new subdivision come up. So I really think we will see even more growth when we look at our 2023 budget and going forward. Next. So here's the big thing we've dealt with in 2020, 2021, and I'm here today again because we still are dealing with the impacts of COVID-19. But I'm happy to say that this year the budget is in person versus last year we did all of this virtually. So I say in person, but the hybrid model. And I think going forward, we're going to see a lot more of that. Next. So this is kind of a busy slide and kind of small to look at, but it's been almost 2 years since the pandemic was declared. Operations across the county have been impacted from our library system to our long-term care. The county has incurred extra expenditures and has lost revenue because of some of the implications of COVID-19. Next. However, we've been very fortunate as a municipality that upper levels of government have provided funding to offset some of these COVID-19 expenditures. And we have the direct one that comes to the county, which is the SafeRestart. We also have received funding from the Ministry of Long-Term Care, the Ministry of Health for our land ambulance, Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and the Ministry of Education. Some funding has to be spent in the year, for example, long-term care or land ambulance. So between the finance area and the departments, we have to go through and we have to reconcile that. If we haven't spent all of the money that they've given us, then they will take back those dollars. So we're currently in the process of doing that for both our long-term care and land ambulance right now. So before, as somebody asked, that will impact what our surplus will be. So that's kind of the piece as we go through. We have normal year-end stuff. But on top of that, the finance department also has to do that COVID reconciliations. Next. And in the, well, here talks about it here too, is the social service relief funding. So I can say that I have been heavily involved with that. And it has really been, I almost say a gift, because we've really been able to support our homeless and vulnerable during this pandemic with the additional money that we got from the province. So we were able to get about $1.4 million from the social service relief funds. The The last phase comes to an end at March 2022, and I'll be coming back to council at the next meeting to talk a little bit about that, wrapping it up, how we've allocated our money, and thinking about how do we go forward. I can tell you from putting individuals up into some of our local hotels, we've had great relationships in place, Canadian Mental Health, and also our food banks. Every food bank that's out there has come to us and we've all needed money. Individuals are reaching out to them and supports are needed. So this has been really wonderful to receive this money. And then I'm going to say, don't know how we're going to go forward because it's a lot of money. We'll have to think about that as we move forward. And then I'll also point out in 2022, we've already received new funding for long-term care and land ambulance from the province for COVID-19. Next. I'm just pointing out, so this has got to do with the restart funding. We had two reports that were due. The first one was the interim report. We submitted that in June 2022. And the second report is the spring 2022. So we'll also probably be having some conversations in this budget. There is an allocation using some of that COVID dollars, but there still is a remaining balance. And obviously with COVID-19 maybe winding down or changing, I'm not sure what the right language is right now, but we may need to think about what kind of expenditures will we have, whether it's getting individuals back to work or continuing the hybrid model, that type of thing. And also if we're thinking of our library system, how do we make sure that we have the right cleaning protocols in place? There's a number of things that we have to move forward when we think of moving past the COVID-19 and what the new environment will look like. Next. So this slide just kind of pulls all of the Safe Restart funding together. So in total, we were able to receive that $2.9 million. In 2020, we did an allocation of $880,000. In 2021, at the time when I did the reporting to the province, we had to say, what do we think we're going to be spending for 2021? So we've got that projected allocation of the $902,000. But of course, I have to go back as part of the year-end process and really look at what were expenditures, where was the revenue that we didn't materialize, that type of thing. And then, of course, that leaves the bottom, which is kind of that deferred revenue, which we have to set aside, which we can use into 2022 and going forward is that $1 million. That kind of summarizes it all up on one sheet. Next. So the strategic plan, I brought a copy here, because that has really been fundamental in preparing the budget in 2021 and 2022. So the 2022 budget aligns with the strategic plan and the 4 areas of strategic focus, which are listed there: cultivating community vitality, connecting through infrastructure, strengthening our economy, and promoting service excellence. Next. So the plan includes themes of innovation, modernization, leadership, for example. Next. So I've kind of gone through and just took a few highlights. I will say later on, we'll talk about the comprehensive communication strategy. So I'm hoping when we get somebody in that role, I can really work with them and make these a bit more formal. And that will be kind of like a report card that reports out on the strategic plan for 2022 and then 2022 and 2021 and going forward. So the next couple slides are just highlights of some of the successes in 2022 and how they align with the strategic plan. For example, here's the first one is cultivating community vitality. And you can clearly see we've done a few things. There is our Middlesex Connect, which is our community transportation. We also had the community safety and well-being plan, which was approved by council. And I can say in 2022, we'll be working with the local municipalities on how do we implement that plan, and work is already going to underway for that. We also had things like community paramedicine, and we can't forget the huge success of the mobile vaccinating clinics. And of course, we had the grand opening of our new childcare center in Elm in Glencoe. We had the Strathroy and Ilderton early on child and family centers. So we were able to have a couple ribbon cuttings for our warden at the time. And of course, we had the success of the community navigator position and Adelaide Metcalfe, where we had that library kiosk. So we can say we're providing library services to Adelaide Metcalfe as well. Next. The next one is connecting through infrastructure. So you definitely can see a connection to Chris over here in transportation. So we also have SWIFT. We have things like the cycling strategy. You put additional money in the budget in 2021, and that tied directly to the plan. Next. Next. Strengthening our economy. Just really the big one last year was that investment in the economic development and supporting that strategy, especially that hashtag Middlesex Strong campaign. Next. And then we have promoting service excellence. A couple highlights here would be, I already talked about that social relief funds where we had to do business cases in order to get that money from the province. We have modernization funding, also economic development, put together that RED application, which really in partnership with the Middlesex Workforce Development really does leverage the dollars that the county puts in if we get other dollars to use with it. And then of course we have the Middlesex Economic Resiliency Task Force. And the survey results and the recommendations really hearing from our community and businesses. Next. So the budget committee is chaired by the warden each year. The budget recommendation includes 0% tax levy increase. That's assuming that there's no changes to the tax rates. Next. So the budget committee meets to review and make recommendations. The next phase of the budget is setting the tax rates, and we'll be talking about that at the next council meeting. Next. So this just goes over the budget timelines. So each department, each December, the department heads prepare the budgets, and in January and February, the budget committee meets to review and make recommendations to council. Next. So budget philosophy, this just really directs all the department heads on what to look for when preparing the budget. So we've already talked about that aligning with the priorities in the council strategic plan, but also that commitment to fund the PSAB process. So you'll see that in our transportation budget, in information technology budget, and of course, all the other departments as well. We also look at, and I think you heard that very clearly as well from the health unit, where we talk about really that zero-based budget. That's what we do. You really look at your budget. Do you need those expenditures? Can you eliminate things that we would say are non-essential? Taking a really deep dive and looking at the budget and presenting that. Next. So very similar to 2021, I kind of took a really quick snapshot of the 2022 budget and some of the highlights and put it again to connecting to our strategic plan. So the first one under cultivating community vitality. So we see an increase in long-term care into the staffing and also into, you're going to see it in capital ask from the long-term care Strathcona Lodge. We have investments in social housing. So if you remember with the City of London, they delivered a 4-year budget. 2023 is the last year of that budget, but each year there was an increase in social housing. We have an investment in the Clean Water Project, which will be part of the planning budget. County official plan update, which is underway. Enhancements in the tourism marketing support for that expansion of the foreign direct investment and economic development services. And of course, we got land ambulance. We've got 4 new 12-hour ambulances as part of this budget. So significant investments. Next. So connecting through infrastructure. So that commitment to upkeep the county bridge assets as defined in the bridge study. We've got the capital investment in the county cycling strategy. We've got approximately in this budget 79.2 lane kilometers for reconstruction and or rehab. We have new traffic signals, bridges, and of course that roundabout that's in Middlesex Center. Next. We have strengthening our economy. It's really coming back again to say that investing in the economic development and their strategy. A new one is our youth workforce development strategy. And then of course, investments to advance the workforce development partnership initiatives and also economic development applied for the RED funding again. Next. Promoting service excellence. Part of the budget and some of the increases will come from the investing in the communication strategy. And I know the consultant has worked with council as well as staff, implementing that centralized procurement services. And that piece came from some of the modernization funding where we had a consultant come in and look at the procurement services at the county and the local municipalities. I can tell you, we've also had good discussions with our local municipalities around the procurement services. So the recommendations is not only to support the county, but it's also to support the local municipalities. And that's how it is designed. I've also reached out and talked to some of the staff at each one of the local municipalities to say, how could we build this together? So not just a Beta Middlesex solution or Middlesex County, but going through and making sure everybody's involved in that process. Participation in provincial modernization programs. We've also got that commitment to asset management policies and some big requirements from the province. And Chris Trainey is the lead mostly on asset management and software support and licensing to support our continued remote business practices. Next. So some of the history and content. So assumptions, as every year, we don't have the final land ambulance, so we have to make an assumption based on how we've received funding in the past. We also have to take into account some prior decisions, whether it be the council strategic plan, the library services review, economic development plan, and of course, a transportation 5-year county roads capital plan. We also have the impact of impact, because as you know, the reassessment hasn't happened. So that will be sometime in the future. And we also have the declining funds or revenue that we get for the OMPF. Next. And you can see here's the chart that I show every year that shows for the County of Middlesex anyway, the OMPF reductions continue to come each year. Although we are grateful for the money that we do get. Next. So now I'm going to walk through a few of the budget committee recommendations. So the first one was on the administration. So we added 100,000 to the supplementary income. That came because during the budget committee process, I was getting back some of the actual revenue items from the local municipalities. I think I had 4 of them at that time and some of the bigger ones. So felt comfortable that we were able to add 100,000 there. We also added 15,000 for the feasibility study for the digitization of non-municipal records. Next. I can say can you back there for a second, Greg? I can say that there was also a lot of discussion that if there was another round of modernization funding, we're hoping that the work around this feasibility study would allow us to present a submission for the digitization of non-municipal records with the modernization, if another round comes. Next. So Strathcona Lodge, in this year's budget, you're going to see it's one of the larger departments that has an increase. So there was lots of discussion around the capital items that were part of that budget, around the staffing that was part of that budget. So there was lots of discussion back and forth with the budget committee. Chris Trainey and I met with Brent to talk a little bit about those capital items. What did we think could actually get spent in 2022? Just because we know there is some delays on some of this large equipment and we might not be able to get it in 2022. So could we defer some of that to 2023? And when we get to the long-term care budget, you're going to see the items that were deferred. And then there was also adjustment to the capital reserve account. The original submission, actually, there's 350,000 roughly left in that account. We decided that we didn't want to take all of the money out of there. So we just had to adjust that reserve account. So we left a balance. There was also a slight increase to the provincial funding related to capital. So we added that as well. So you're going to notice there is a couple housekeeping things in here. The reason that it was done like that was so if somebody looked at the original budgets that went to the budget committee and they look at the budgets that are now presenting to you, when you see that little reconciliation with the budget committee, it wraps it all up together. So we're able to tie it back. So you can tell I am an accountant. I like to reconcile things. And then of course, we have some new staff positions that have been included in the Lodge budget. Now, these positions cannot be funded from the province, so they are 100% municipally funded. However, these positions have really come from the impact of COVID-19 out at the home. As we know, COVID-19 in the health sector has been a real strain. So from the county's perspective, one time we can use some of that provincial COVID-19 funding, where I showed you that spreadsheet. And that's where I said we'll be showing that when we do the budget recap of how much of that over $1 million that we have to use for 2022. Next, the one thing I will point out for the lodge, when you're looking at that recap and you see that full budget for the lodge, it stays in place. Where I took that revenue is down at the bottom, COVID-19 dollars. But when I show you the recap, I'll kind of explain that again. The third recommendation goes to transportation. Again, lots of conversation about this. Can we take some money out of the surplus or not? So again, we will have a surplus in the 2021 winter maintenance. And it was elected from the budget committee that 200,000 be applied to the 2022 budget. Last year, we took an amount as well, but again, this is only a one-time direction. Next. And the remainder of the surplus will go back to the winter maintenance reserve. Budget committee recommendation 4. These are some housekeeping ones, but adjustments for final budgets. One has to do with the Middlesex London Health Unit, because we need to budget to the PSAB budget. That's how we get the funding from the province. So we just had to make a slight tweak to that. The other one had to do with the Middlesex London Emergency Medical Services. Oh, the health unit. That was the other one. Sorry. Black. So the health unit, I gave a draft. When I went back online and found their actual budget, it was just a little bit different. So that's just a small adjustment to make it to the actual budget that you heard from the health unit this morning. Number 5, next. So here's the big one, and lots of discussion at the budget committee around that. What percentage did the budget committee want to make to council? And again, I need to come back to that COVID-19 and the impacts of COVID-19 over the last few years at the local municipalities and to all of the residents in the community and our businesses. So the budget committee put forward a recommendation. How do we get to a 0% tax levy increase? And to do that was applying some of the tax rate stabilization. So this year, the amount would be that 3.7 million from the reserve. Just to remind you that in 2021, the actual surplus that we applied. So if you know the surplus from 2021, I go to council each year and ask, what do you want to do with the surplus? Traditionally put it in the tax rate stabilization. So I pointed out here, because when you're looking at the 3.7, you can nicely come back to that surplus of the 2.68 million. And I can tell you, we're still working the numbers, but there will be a surplus in 2022. And probably I'll be looking at a number that's similar to that by the time we're done looking at COVID-19. I got an email on Friday from the City of London from the housing. So there's about 800,000 of a surplus just with that alone. And we also had that in 2021 as well. Next. So the 2022 Middlesex County budget. So we're going to go into a little bit more depth on some of these. Next. So again, I pointed out that the 2022 net levy tax increase is 0. I do want to point out again, that's assuming no tax policy change. If you do make any tweaks or changes to the tax policy, it could change these numbers just slightly. And the net taxation requirement is that $47 million. Next. So because we had these numbers last year, the 2021 residential tax rate is that number there. And if you went per 100,000, we're talking about 397.79. So if nothing changes with their tax policy, that's kind of what we'd be looking at for the 2022 budget as well. Next. So some of the budget drivers. We've got long-term care. I talked about that, staffing and capital. We have land ambulance with the additional new ambulances. We have the centralized procurement services. We have the communication strategy and the human resources. We have the insurance costs. So I talked about that last year. You heard the health unit talk about that. If you hear the budget presentations from across the province, everybody's talking about insurance cost increases. The budget also includes the union collective agreement impacts. We have the non-union annual increases, which includes council of 2%. And of course, the grid and the benefit increases in there as well. And we also have inflationary increases. So the average CPI in 2021 was at 3.4%. I point that out because it does impact things, our library rent. And also I can point out, I think in January 2022, that CPI, if I'm correct, is about 5.1%. And I think shortly, we're probably going to see a new CPI number come out, definitely from the US, but then Canada usually follows as well. Next. So this kind of shows the budget drivers, the big ones by the department. I usually do that to show the total and how it aligns with some of those budget increases, especially going back to that tax rate stabilization, what you're taking out. So again, we have the lodge, the ambulance, social housing. So that's the yearly increase. The administration budget, the library budget, transportation, Middlesex Health Unit. You heard them, there's a $121,000 increase. However, I think you also heard from the health unit that in 2021, they had a surplus. It's around 120,000. That's also going to be coming into our surplus this year. So those almost kind of do wash. And then we have the reduction in the OMPF funding. Next. So when we're looking at 2022 budget, we also have to think about what are the future budget impacts. So we think about that as we go forward. So as I pointed out, 2023, we also know that social housing, we will see another increase. And then from the City of London, we're going to see a new multi-year budget and a new 4 years. That also impacts our land ambulance because we have to start to get ready for that budget as well to give to the city. We also have the transportation 5-year county roads capital plan, which is pretty significant in nature. And we also have the impacts of the provincial downloading, and that is on the public health services, social services, childcare, and Ontario Works. In Ontario Works, as you know, we're going to be moving to that life stabilization, but we really don't know what the funding model looks like for that yet. And then in childcare, there is a new funding model coming through, and there will be expectations for the council to pick up some of that funding. Next. So this is the budget recap. So this, and I know it's small, so I apologize. But, so this kind of pulls everything in together. This is the page I go back to all the time. But at the top, you can see it shows each one of the departments and their budgets. If you look at the net over to the left, and I've got a couple slides that show that, that's the gross budget. And then if you look over to the right, which is the net budget, that's where we talk about the levy, and that's where we talk about the net cost to the county. The gross budget, for an example, and the next couple slides show it really well, but land ambulance is our largest budget. That's because we get provincial dollars and we also get dollars from the City of London. Same with social services and also the lodge. Then when we go to the net budget, and Chris loves this when he sees the next slide, is because of course, transportation is the largest budget for the county. On the bottom of there, if you can see it, we also have where I talked about taking money from the winter maintenance. You'll see that 200,000. It's showed at the bottom because that is shown as a reserve or a revenue item. You'll also see 513,000 from the COVID-19 being applied to this budget. So that's the provincial dollars. We talk when we get to long-term care, there's 380,000 of that just for long-term care staff. The other piece of that is we also applied COVID-19 for the first year of the communications new staff member that we're proposing, and also half of the human resource position that we're looking for as well. Both of those are as a direct result of COVID-19. So definitely tie nicely into that funding model. And then of course, by using the tax rate stabilization and of course the growth, we haven't talked about the growth yet, but we have that $1.26 million that we have applied here as well. And I'm really hoping that next year we see that same kind of growth. But if you remember, last year was a little bit lower, but hopefully we'll continue to see growth like that as we move forward. Next. So here's where we just do pie charts and a couple of versions so you can actually see those expenditures by department. So again, I point out, you see the land ambulance, the size of that. Next. And here you can see it by over a 3-year period. Next. So this is the net taxation. So of course, this is the money that the county is required to fund. And then you can see the change when it switched from land ambulance over to transportation. Next. And this is a good slide because it's really showing the impact of the budgets over a 3-year period. And I will point out, if you look at the Lodge, you will see that in 2020, 2021, the expenditures are very similar, but in 2022, that's where you're seeing an increase in that budget ask. This chart kind of shows it just kind of nicely there. Next. So this is just a quick snapshot of all of the capital that's being asked from the different departments. So you can see it's a total of about 20 million, which is very consistent with previous years. So the larger ones, of course, is transportation, and then we have land ambulance. Next. So now we're going into the departmental budgets. So as I said, I'll kind of walk through them at a high level and highlight some of the highlights of it or increases in that budget. And then we will pull up the actual budgets and the department heads can answer any questions that you'll have. And I'll try to be kind of quick as I go through these, so it allows you guys some time for questions. I'm a quick talker. Okay, next. So administration, and as you know, the administration is quite a large budget and includes governance, which is council, office of the CAO, the clerks, human resources, treasury department, legal department, facilities, and community transportation. Next. So these are kind of just some of the highlights, whether they be 2021 or 2022. But again, we had the full year of the operation of the community transportation program. We also had transition strategy underway for providing human resources to our land ambulance. We also had some successful collective bargaining with Unifor and QP 208, 2018. And we also had the WSIB Excellence Program implemented. Next. So here is the actual snapshot of the budget. So you do see a 9.4% increase. I do want to point out, this is the full budget. So when I mentioned that communication staff and also the HR staff, I'm showing it, I want to say gross, but I show it here at a gross. Down below, when I show as a revenue item from COVID-19, that does help offset that. So that 9.4% isn't actually 9.4% for administration, but you need to see that because next year you won't have that COVID-19 offsetting that. So this just kind of more full disclosure of our budget. We also had that revenue, which we include a 400,000. That was part of the use of proceeds, and we have that every year for a number of years. We also have council and warden travel and expenses. If you remember, it was slightly reduced in 2021. This budget is kind of just putting it back to the traditional expenditures. I will point out there that a lot of these items, especially in administration, I didn't actually apply inflation to travel and expenditure, just because I knew built in there, there was still going to be some little surpluses because of COVID and not being able to go to some of the conferences maybe in January and February because of COVID and they're more virtual. So that kind of offsets each other. Next year, we'll probably be looking at inflation and having to think about that as we go forward. Next. So some of the big investments from strategic priorities and staffing. So the Treasury Department includes that establishing of that centralized procurement services. So the budget includes a procurement manager position and a coordinator position based on the recommendations from the Modernization Procurement Services Review. And I believe it was probably 2 councils ago, you actually heard from the consultant who came in and did a really good presentation that talked about that service review, talked about why these 2 recommendations were put forward for these 2 staff members. And again, if you move forward on this recommendation, this will not only support the county, but it also will support the local municipalities as well. And the next one is that Human Resource Department includes a new human resource position that supports not only the county, but also land ambulance. So kind of that 50-50 split. And of course, the 50% revenue will also come from land ambulance. And then in 2022 only from COVID. Next. And then the big one also is the county is in the process of developing a communication strategy. So this budget includes that staff position. that will really implement along with Marcy, the communication strategy as we go forward. Again, one time only for 2022, that staffing is offset from the revenue from the provincial COVID-19 funding. Next. And just a couple points on the capital. So it's about 55,000. One of the big items here is a new multi-function printer photocopier that really does support the clerk's department, council, and allows us to produce some big printing that if we can't do it here at the county, we'd have to go out to a third party and get that done. And we also have the traditional replacements of our computer hardware based on the life cycle guidelines. And we also have, if we hire new staff, we also have to have computer equipment for those new staff. It also does account for governance and council, because we will be looking at a new council coming forward. So that's taken into effect here as well. Whether it be iPads or computers, that's to be worked out with the IT department, but we have a budget in there. Next. Okay, so planning. So obviously county planning, we have local planning, we have mapping and GIS, woodlands, and local planning. Next. So some kind of highlights, the official plan background work, we have provincial changes, we have the strong development across the county. We've talked about the population growth, we've talked about the census, and obviously planning is right in there doing that work to support the local municipalities. And we also have some staff capacity building. Next. So here is the budget. So planning is a 7.1% increase. And a couple highlights here. So it includes that 30,000 from the clean water program. I will point out, because we had some discussion at the committee about this, that reserve is coming to an end. So if we want to still continue to fund that program in 2023, we'll need to come up with revenue for that 30,000. Next. Economic development. Again, the main things here are research and information management, marketing and communication, business retention, and investment attraction. And definitely with COVID-19, economic department will be very busy with that COVID recovery for our community. Next. So just some of the highlights: COVID-19 supports, tourism development, economic development, and workforce development. Next. So the budget is a 13% increase. So we see an investment from the economic development department for the tourism budget. So really trying to work on tourism marketing support and the expansion of foreign direct investment and economic development services. The 2022 budget continues to emphasize that business retention and new investment attraction in the wake of COVID-19. And of course, economic development has gone out there and has put forward a lot of grants to get additional money, once again, to leverage the money from the county in economic development. Next. So information technology. I'm going to go next. I'm just looking at the time. Next. So some of the highlights are obviously the Middlesex County new website, investment in cybersecurity, the network design updates, the Middlesex server infrastructure project, Microsoft 365 migration, and the IT consolidation data share services. So the plans to migrate additional supported sites to county data center. Next. Okay, so the actual 2022 ITS budget is asking for a 5.1% increase. It seems like a large increase when I say some of these, but when we actually look at the overall budget, that 5.1% maybe isn't as large if we compare it maybe to a transportation budget. So we see in here an increased revenues from the local municipalities. As just a reminder, their ITS department serves most of our local municipalities. So we do have revenue comes in from local municipalities, and we have expenditures that go out. And we definitely see that when we look at our expenditures each month. We have one new position to support enhanced cybersecurity efforts and ensure success of network-related projects and supports going forward. Next. And these are just a couple of other items that support the budget. So we have software support and licensing increase. That again, very similar to insurance. We're seeing those increases across different municipalities. We also have network expenditures and hardware maintenance. Next. So the information technology capital, each year has been at that 150,000 amount. There's a breakdown here of what's incorporated into the 150,000. So of course, we've got the computer hardware. We've got that's existing. We've got the computer hardware that's new. We've got software licensing. We've got backups. We've got that phone system replacement. And we have that transfer to the PSAB budget. Next. So the social services review. So if I'm correct, I think this is a Newberry location for housing, social housing. So of course, social services is made up of Ontario Works and discretionary benefits. We also have our children's services. And as you know, we flow through a lot of money out of children's services that go to our licensed childcare centers. So whether it be the general operating grants, those fee subsidies, one-time grants, special needs resourcing, capacity building, wage enhancement grants, and the home child care enhancement grants. So when I'll be coming back, I'm sure sometime in 2022 to talk about that new funding model and what that relationship will be for the Middlesex County going forward. Next. We also have in this budget social housing, and we have homeless prevention. As you know, each year we get money from CHIPPY, which is that provincial community homeless prevention initiative. And then one time we did get the social service relief funds. I haven't been able to read it, but I know there was an announcement yesterday in relation to some homeless dollars going to municipalities. So I'm hoping maybe that's a positive thing, but I haven't been able to dig into that one yet. Next. And then we have a small piece called Homemaker and Nurses Service Program. Next. So some just highlights that we had in 2021 is staff continue to work mainly from home. However, I can guarantee you there was no service disruption, and they were able to provide services to the clients, financial, employment, and life stabilization supports. Again, sometimes we were the only individual that some of these people were able to call during COVID-19. So really that life stabilization here is the county. We're talking about the province moving forward with that, but I'm very proud to say at the county, we've always been doing life stabilization supports, and I think we're very good at connecting our Ontario Works clients with our community agencies that are out there. We also issued some additional funds through the COVID-19 provincial discretionary benefits at the end of the year. We did that in 2021, and we were able to do that in 2022 as well. And that really helped with some PPE or cleaning costs that were required. We also, very happy to say, in 2021, there was a 10% increase in clients obtaining employment over the total number we had in 2020. So even in the middle of a pandemic, when we weren't required to do some of the employment support, we really still were getting results. So I think that's a good thing to say about our service delivery model here at the county. Next. Next. So here is our social services budget. So it's a 4.9% increase. That increase really is coming from the social housing. So the social housing increased by approximately 414,000 in 2022 compared to 2021. And that includes everything. There was a number of business cases, if you can remember from previous years, where they're putting maybe new windows in some of our social housing units, providing better security, also hiring staff, that type of thing, making sure that the vacancy rates go down. That's kind of where that money is directed towards. And we had a slight decrease in our Ontario Works program costs. And our childcare and early years funding really kind of stayed the same. And I have to make sure I point this out. We did have a small increase in our early on funding. So we went up by $27,000. For us, that's a big deal. We've had $350,000 forever. However, I know it's an issue as we look around to our neighboring communities who are getting a lot more than $350,000 to run early on. And I thank council very much for advocating that every chance that we can get. I can't talk enough, and Lindsay could talk about it, but that huge importance of early on, it really does make a difference to our children and their future. And it's important that that funding We try to get increase in money for that funding. That's all I can say is because it's just really well worth the money spent. Next. So transportation. So obviously the overview of transportation. So we have the maintenance, operation, and capital works for over 1.6 lane kilometers of roads and over 250 bridges. We also have to manage the community emergency management activities across the county. And in the last few years, I know for sure that the department's been very busy. In the last 1 year, we have a partnership with the City of London where they provide households special waste disposal for county residents at the City of London landfill. Next. Just a couple highlights because I mentioned these already, but we have the county cycling strategy, a big investment for council. We also have the first stages in the construction of the first roundabout in Middlesex County, which is planned to be completed in 2023. That's really exciting for that one. And we also have some partnerships with local municipalities for renewal of urban areas of Lucan, Elsie Craig, and Park Hill. And then, of course, we have a new traffic signal going at Wonderland Road and Milderton Road. Next. So this budget is a 0.9% increase. And we did receive additional OCIF funding. So that really helped to bring that budget increase down. So thanks very much for that. And we have some operating costs increased to account for inflationary increases. So this is one area or department that really had to tie in those inflationary increases to the budget because they are seeing a direct result of that. And of course, we have the bridge funding raised to meet the expected 10 years expenditures to maintain the bridge assets to the current level of services. And we have the COVID-19 impact to continue to affect the emergency manager expenditures. Next. So we have capital. So you can see that we have the roads at that 11 million, the equipment, the facilities, and the bridge. So we have that total of the $16.7 million capital. And that is a very consistent amount year to year. It's just different on where it's allocated. Next. And some highlights that come from the capital here. We have approximately 79.2 lane kilometers scheduled for that rehabilitation. We also have their partnerships with Lucan, Badolph, and North Middlesex for urban renewal projects in Lucan, Elsie Craig, and Park Hill. Again, I already talked about the roundabout. We also have some major bridges. I outlined them here. Next. We talked about it already, but the new traffic signal. We have that transfer to the equipment capital as part of the asset management. So really that strong requirement and dedication that we stay on top of PSEB. And we have the transfer to the facilities capital as per the asset management policies. Next. So the lodge. So Strathmere Lodge is a 160-bed long-term care home. The lodge provides 24-hour nursing care to adults in need. Next. So this budget is showing a 39% increase. So some of the highlights are newer provincial dollars did come in 2022 and directly aligned with staffing. So this budget reflects that, and there's a list of all the positions there. Again, this is provincial dollars to support that. Wonderful to see this kind of investment in our long-term care. Next. We also see some increases due to one-time capital increases, inflationary pressures, supply chain issues, collective agreement wage increases. And then we also have a number of staff positions. Again, I talked about that. 380,000 of this will be covered by one-time COVID dollars. But really, this is a big investment in long-term care from the county. So we have increased staffing to support the registered nurses. We have 2.0 FTEs and additional ward clerks. We have 1.0 FTE for additional nursing coordinator and 1.4 FTE increase in floor nurse support. Again, theoretically, this is 100% county costs, that there is no provincial dollars available. However, as you know what I do each year, if there is any provincial dollars and I can find it, we definitely will apply that to this. Otherwise, it will be the provincial COVID dollars. Next. So I guess, again, some highlights, the increase of the 0.2 FTE for maintenance staff, as the Middlesex Soil and Crop Improvement Association recently advised that it will no longer be doing voluntary lodge ground keeping. And then there's also an increase of 0.0 FTE food service worker staff in order to enhance food service department operations. Next. And this is 2 pages, so it's a long list of capital. I'm not going to go into great detail on this because you may have questions when that budget kind of pops up, and you have Brent to be able to answer some of those. I can tell you that if you go next. Okay, so these are the items that Budget Committee had a long conversation with Brent, and also Chris Cheney and myself went with Brent, and we kind of looked through it and said, okay, if we could defer any of those capital costs, which ones would they be? These are the ones that we've highlighted. So one would be the switch to point-click care. I want to point out again, if there is any modernization dollars that comes forward again, this is a perfect project that would fit with that. So we definitely would apply for that for this. The other ones that we deferred were the walk-in coolers, the fridges, 65 pound of the washers, and of course the tumbler dryers. Next. So land ambulance. I'm going to go next. Some highlights. So they have over 330 full-time staff and part-time paramedics, approximately 100,000 calls for service, and those are the codes 1 to 8. They also have 13 stations, that specialized paramedic bus. We've seen that a lot lately. We also have community paramedicine and the transport unit. Next. Okay, so their budget is an increase of 10.7%. Again, the biggest thing here is the addition of the 4 new 12-hour ambulances. But they also have a few other items in here as well. Again, I'll point out again that increase to the corporate insurance program, same as the County Middlesex. Next. And I'm going to go next. So capital, we have total capital of that $2 million. So it's to purchase replacement of the emergency vehicles and replacement of the computer hardware as per the life cycle renewal timelines. Next. So we have the library, and I'm going to go next. Obviously, this is one area that was hard hit by COVID-19 in 2020, 2021, and we're seeing that recovery of 2022 and the reopening of our libraries and really being that community hub. It's really been missed, so I know I'm excited about seeing that open again, making sure that we have social services back in there, other community agencies back. So that's kind of, this budget is putting us back to there. Next. So some highlights here. So the continued development of the early on child and family spaces. So we know that we had some capital dollars that came for the Strathroy and Ilderton location. So excited to be able to see families being able to use those spaces as we go in 2022. We also have the community navigator, so that continues to be funded by the CHIPPY program, making such a huge difference out there to help navigate and find those resources that are needed for our homeless and most vulnerable. We have the continued execution of the RFID project, excited when that's going to happen. And we also have the development of the library coordinator positions to maximize capacity. Next. So this budget is a 5.4% decrease. That's because we had some additional dollars in there in the past in regards to really capital. So we have ongoing supplies. We have adjustments to the staffing, which include minimum wage increases and the change to the coordinator positions. We also have some scheduled technology replacements. Really, it's getting individuals to come back in the library. So some of that technology replacements are new technology, which we see in capital. is really making sure that we attract our community members to come back to our libraries. And I know they will, and fast. Next. And this is just the capital items. So we talked about the existing ones and we talked about some new ones. So a total of that 154,000. Next. I'm not going to go into detail on this one because you've already heard from the health unit directly. It was wonderful that they were able to come, and hopefully next year we can do the same kind of presentation to council as well. I also want to point out, I know some questions were asked, but it's my understanding that the COVID-19 expenditures will be covered from the Ministry of Health. So we don't have to worry about those, which is good because they're quite large. Next. So we have the reserve and the reserve funds. Obviously, these are to cover liabilities and emergencies, ensure liquidity, effective asset management, and allow for the flexibility to take advantage of opportunities. And of course, I talked about that, sometimes being able to use to really help our community when it comes to our tax rates. Next. So this is just a summary of our reserves and our reserve funds, so you can have an idea of how much we have in there. So we have the 2021 projected, and then we have the 2022 projected. And of course, that's projected based on the budget that's in front of you today. So I think that we still have strong and healthy reserves in place. Next. And this is the tax rate stabilization. So that was on the budget recap. It's showing that we had the 2021 projected amount. And then, as you can see, we applied that amount that will offset our budget for the 2022 projected amount. So you can see that change. Next. So that's the end of my presentation. However, we're now going to, and sorry, there was a lot of slides, but now we're going to jump into the individual departments, and we will kind of put just each one up at a time. And if you have questions, the department heads will be the ones that will be able to answer them, or I can answer them if required as well. But at this point, I do want to say a big thank you to my finance team. I have Ewa here, so thanks very much. And I also have Greg. So I want to say a big thank you to Greg because he has been a huge asset in this whole process. He helps me with his presentations. He's helped me with the budget. I'm somehow making an IT person into an accountant. I can't believe it, but I can't believe how lucky we are to have him. And thanks very much, Greg, for making this all happen. Next.
Okay, thank you, Cindy. Do you want to,
I think he's going to pull up.
Is he?
each
Okay,
one,
yeah.
Unless you have questions about my presentation, which you might have.
there might be a couple quick questions right now. Councillor Vanderheden?
I have a question on the social service piece. Do you want me to wait till you present or do you?
Yeah.
You want me to ask now?
Yeah. Well, no, we can ask when I present.
Okay, so I'm on the, I think it's page 6 or something in the documentation. Just for clarification to me, the Housing Development Corporation is listed under the City of London Housing Division of the County of Middlesex share of the housing, of the social housing. So I'm assuming that's part of the London Middlesex community housing piece. Is that correct?
For the warden, to the council, you're asking about the Housing Development Corporation.
Yeah, it's listed on there as part of their corporation.
So yes, so the county does pay a piece of that budget. That's part of our, I want to call it a bill that we get from the City of London. I can say that we recently had an MOC meeting with the City of London. So we did talk about the Housing Development Corp. We talked about how does the county reach out and have discussions and maybe utilize some of the services of HDC and also our local municipalities. So I can say that the next steps is we're going to try to pull a meeting together because there's been a lot of changes over at the City of London and who's responsible for what area of housing. So Dirk and myself are going to sit down and have a bit of a discussion around HDC, what's HDC responsible for, and how does the county connect into HDC? Because I know that Strathcona Lodge, we've tried to link Strathcona Lodge staff with HDC. So we just want to kind of really map that out on how we can work together better as we go forward in the future. So I'll come back to you on a bit more details in regards to that.
Well, that's really good to hear because I mean, the amount went up almost, $440,000 that they're looking for us for the actual budget. And I just want to know where the money goes, because it's not coming to Middlesex County that I can see. I know a couple of meetings ago, we had a couple of things that were happening in a couple of our social housing facilities, which was finally good to see. But when we asked the HDC to advise if we could use their advice and their services in order to put in an affordable housing unit, they said they were not even aware that we pay into their budget. So like seriously, this is very, very problematic to me that we're paying almost $500,000 to a corporation and they don't even know that we belong. Like that's just my comment, and I look forward to a report.
Through the warden to the council, I will clarify a little bit around that. You're looking at, so I always say gross and net. So that's the gross amount. We actually pay, I think it's probably closer to the 70% when I put on our allocation that we're, however, still significant for the county of Middlesex. But we did really have some good dialogue and discussions. And like I said, we'll come back and when we kind of reframe on how we can work together with the city and the HDC.
Okay, so we're just looking at the time. Do you want to wait on the question, or do you want to ask the question now? We have a couple choices here. We can push through, and we know lunch is coming at noon, and then continue on. Do you want a quick question? Yep, that's fine.
Okay, thanks. And through the warden, just on that housing piece, Cindy, you said quickly that you got a phone call yesterday from housing and something about an $800,000. Is that coming back for 2022 or is that coming back for 2021?
Through the warden to councillor, that's 2021. So each year we reconcile and we get final billing. So no different than what I do for the land ambulance, goes back to the billing to the City of London. That's the billing from 2021. So they give me the final bill. And so it is about 800,000. So that will be part of our surplus.
And that's in housing?
Yes, that would be in our housing bill.
So we've already paid the bill. So why don't we ask them to spend the money in the county rather than us giving the money back? But anyways, that's interesting.
Councillor Mayhew?
Cindy, thanks very much. Cindy, there was $15,000 for the digitalization of non-municipal records. I know there was the vision of council was somewhat different than what was initially proposed by the parties that were asking for this, a much more modest vision. And but we wanted to have some beginning and some start. Is that line in reference to that? Can I interpret that as the committee's contemplation of what was spoken in the past about the importance of records and history?
Thanks to the warden, to the councillor. You absolutely are correct, but I'm actually going to defer this over to Bill.
So thanks for the question, Al. We're working towards so that money is put in place so that we can do what's the term we're using, Cindy? Basically, pardon? Feasibility study, a project plan, if you will. And at the same time, we're applying for modernization funding for a project of that magnitude. So we think we're going to be able to, with that amount of money, we'll be able to get started on something and get a plan in place for a digitization version of an archive, and then report back to council on what the total cost of that would be. And also at the same time, apply for the funding that we'd need to get forward. It's either going to have to come from council or we're going to be able to get it from modernization. But I think it's either our first or second highest priority if there is another modernization program. There's been rumblings that there will be another modernization program beyond what's already been announced. And so I think it's first on our list in terms of priority, but this gets us started. And so what we're thinking is that you're going to have a comprehensive plan by the second quarter with this money of how we would go about doing it. And then it's just a matter of resourcing it after that.
Seeing no other questions at the moment. Cindy, do you want to go ahead?
So I will just, for each department, we're going to pull up kind of the summary. And if there's any questions, we'll answer those. Then we move from administration and then we go to the next one. And then that department head will be able to respond. So the first one in front of you is the administration budget. We've talked briefly about what are some of the highlights in those. So we've got the centralized procurement in here. We also have the communication strategy and that staff member associated with the communication strategy. Again, I'm linking that one to COVID-19 one time. We also have in our human resources, one additional staff. That staff will support 50% of the county and 50% for land ambulance. So in 2022, that position is funded. I do want to point out that each one of those positions started, I believe it was in April. Same with the procurement, started in April, because I heard that question that was asked with the health unit. So I'm trying to, when I add new positions, to really think about that. We can't hire until later on in the year. So that first year, we do allocate that accordingly. We also have in there the non-union increases of that 2%, which covers council and staff. We also have, I mentioned about right-sizing that budget back for council on staff expenditures. So when we go forward, that really was the nature of this budget as well. Try not to think post-COVID and really make sure that we have a budget that responds to the needs that we have, especially as we move forward. I think those are the big, and then we talked about the supplementary taxes where we increased it from 700,000 to 800,000. Although we did keep the write-offs the same at that 400,000. So there's obviously a strategy that goes between the two of those. They really go hand in hand. We also had that 400,000 that was from the proceeds of use. So that's a revenue item that's in that budget for a period of years. And that really replaces that rental income that we used to receive. So I think those are some of the big highlights that were in the administration budget from year over year. And of course, we had a little bit of capital, and I talked about that. We talked about the photocopier machine, which is a lot more than a photocopier machine. But, and then, of course, just traditional hardware replacements for existing. And then if we have new staff, we have new hardware for that as well. I think that's the main highlights for the admin budget.
Okay. Seeing no questions, we'll move on.
Okay, so the next one. Okay. So the next one will be economic development. So really, I'll just point out so that this budget is really not seeing any major increases. It's just really leveraging and really making sure that it can continue to support the economic development strategic plan. And of course, links into the county strategic plan. So you will see there's a small increase in there. I will say, I also do know that Kara's gone out and regarding grants, she's went out to get additional grants. We're kind of waiting to hear back on a number of those because those grants do help leverage the county dollars.
Councillor Vanderheiden, did you have a question?
If I could, thank you through the warden. On the economic development budget, it talks about rental space in Kamoka for 2 small offices. And that was just confusing to me as we have an entire building here where we could have offices. So why are we using space outside of our facility?
Through the warden to councillor, I'm going to defer that to Bill.
So thanks for the question. So I think it was probably 2020, Curtis, or maybe 2019, sorry, that we started talking here around council about decentralization. So economic development was actually very high on our priority list to decentralize because what we were trying, it's awkward whenever you're trying to do economic development about the county and you're bringing people into the city. And so we started looking at, I'm pretty sure it was 2019, might have been 2018 for opportunities for low cost ways to get the economic development folks out into the county, recognizing as well that there'd be savings from that over time. That would be where the cost would be offset by just our travel out into the county and the other work that the economic development's doing. But it also just was a messaging piece. It was really about visibility and about making sure that we're out in the county and supporting all of the different initiatives out there. So we started by looking for low-cost space in our existing facilities, but ended up working with Middlesex. The problem with our existing facilities is that all of them would require a bit of an add-on, and also they weren't in the best locations. We started thinking about high traffic and how we could get high visibility, and ultimately we were able to talk to Middlesex Center about their wellness center and getting a space in the wellness center as an opportunity because the traffic is so high there. And it's also where a lot of the economic development work is done, is in that area, and good access points to all the other places and good visibility. So that is a significant part of our decentralization plan for services coming out of this building. I think you're right that you're going to, if you look at our decentralization plan, you could say we have lots of room in this building, but you have to remember as well that we're planning for a much smaller footprint in this building going forward over the next couple of years. And this is certainly part of that, where our target is to have just 2 floors of use of this building in the next 3 years. And so, Gainsborough Garage was part of that. The work we're doing at the expansion of libraries is part of that. And certainly economic development's part of that. And certainly planning's part of that with getting folks out into local municipalities. All of that, and this is a small piece, but it was actually our highest priority piece back in 2018, was to get economic development out into the county.
So I guess just follow up. So down the road, maybe we need to have a conversation about which spaces we use and why. And we still have comprehensive libraries, whether there's opportunity to work with our libraries to make them even stronger by renting space from our own libraries in order to facilitate. I mean, that's an opportunity for a conversation down the road instead of renting extra space in, not that doesn't matter where it is, but it's just, the use of the dollars to put the programs together. That's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, and I think that's a good reminder. If you told me, hey, Bill, today you have to tell me the entire decentralization plan, I wouldn't be able to do it simply because there's still not enough known about the future use of this building by the developer. But we're getting closer to that. I would say that at least by Q3 of this year, we'll be able to say, okay, here's the footprint that we're going to have. Here's for how long that footprint will be here. And here's the entire decentralization plan. But I couldn't do it today. But the good news in regard to Joanne's question is that we did do a very careful analysis of our existing space. And the cost of adding on to a library or cost of capital was much higher for this particular project compared to a very, very good lease arrangement that Middlesex Center provided for us for Kamoka. So I was ecstatic when Middlesex Center offered us this opportunity. I don't know if everybody's seen it. We probably have to do a better job of marketing it. But man, from not only a cost perspective, but also from a visibility and service perspective, this one I think was check marks all the way down. So we're pretty excited about this. But we'll do a better job of explaining where things are going at decentralization project in the next 2 quarters for sure.
Okay, thank you. Just a quick comment regarding the economic development budget. I think when we looked at it through the committee, we saw a lot of the common strategies we see through the province and through our local municipal leaders. We saw the emphasis on the workforce development, much like we saw with the Western Ontario Wardens Caucus strategy, and also the focus on the skilled trades coming out of the high schools. So I think the economic development, although we're talking tourism, is also really aligning itself with strategies that should make Middlesex stronger.
Okay, no more question. Next, Greg. So in front of you is the planning and woodlots. If you do have any questions, Dirk is available by Zoom. Or you can come down.
Questions regarding the planning and woodlots? And I think some of the concern about the monies was to do with the fines that are collected from this department. That was part of the extra money that we had to spend, and that is dwindling. So I don't know if Mark needs to go out and start looking for people that are doing things wrong or what we want to do there, but but that is a note to remember.
And also, Warden, we have a note about a use of proceeds report. I think we're saying kind of the same thing, but it's the use of proceeds report and about opportunities. We took this from the last planning discussion about opportunities to plant offsite potentially. So that's definitely on our radar as well.
Right. Any other questions? Seeing none.
Okay, thanks. So the next one is information technology. And if you do have any questions, Chris Bailey can answer those.
Any questions for Chris? Seeing none, moving on.
Okay, thanks. And the next one up is social services.
Counselor Vanderhayden?
And you've already touched on this, Cindy, and I'm going to talk about the childcare piece. And I know the Women's Caucus has worked very, very hard, talked to every minister we can. We've given them the numbers. We've done everything we can. Is there any strategy moving forward so that we actually can, like, I don't know what else we can do to show that we are we are totally in the backseat. We're not even in the bus sometimes with the dollars that are coming forward. So just.
Through the warden to counselor, actually, Bill wants to respond to that one.
So I'd say the answer for the time being is no. And the question you asked was, is there anything more that we can do? No, I would say that past warden Kathy will tell you that we have done as much as we can administratively and politically for the time being. We're not getting the right answers, not from our political representatives and not from the administrative representatives. And so the only other thing that we can do is now this is an election issue. This is something that we have to, as part of our communication strategy, talk about in the upcoming election. It's certainly something we've even talked to. We had a meeting about communication strategy, Marcy, I don't know, it was a month ago with the city. And we even got the city engaged in this discussion where we said, okay, we need you to help us make it an election issue as well. It's not just us. And they agreed that this is something where we have to, oh, sorry, it wasn't only with the city. It was with the hospital and other players as well around the table about regional imperative needs. So this is something that I would say in this next quarter is going to be our, and the quarter after that is going to be our communication strategy. The number one focus of our communication strategy is helping understand, because I don't think we've done a great job of educating yet beyond this table and beyond the politics. Now we have to go to the people and say, like we were left with no choice. We have to go to the public and say, is it fair that Middlesex is being disadvantaged by this amount? And it's quantifiable. And the impacts are even larger than the quantifiable number, the downstream impacts. So now we have to go to the people and say, if you don't think this is fair, we need you to ask about this during the provincial election and make that a focus. So it certainly will be. It's very, very, I would say if it's not the highest priority, it's very close.
I think we've had a few meetings now, joint meetings.
So just really quickly, so maybe the one thing that we could still do is write a letter to the provincial government saying, every province in Canada has now signed a document with the federal government in order for childcare dollars, and the province of Ontario still hasn't. And when we talked to the ministers the last time, they said that the announcement is imminent. Well, that was over a month ago. That's not imminent to me. And those dollars will be off the table someday, and Ontario will be it.
Sorry, I think we're speaking at the same time there. You had a follow-up. We have had several meetings with the City of London now. We just had one last week, Cindy, where we talked extensively about the role of the social services back and forth. And I think there were very good conversations, and I think they realized the numbers are not right as far as so they have really, we've had a great conversation about it. And I think as far as working together and in writing a letter and sending that forward, that's on the books. So I think that's something that we're going to continue with. Councillor Elliott, did you have a question?
Yeah, I would just add the key piece is working together with the City of London, because it's not just Middlesex County who isn't getting enough funding to address the needs of our community. It's the City of London isn't even getting equitable funding when you compare it all to Lambton and Perth and what everyone else is receiving. And so I think that's the key piece is, and I know every time the Women's Caucus has reached out to Steve Clark, it's always been, go talk to the City of London, that's your problem. And so we really need to drive that key piece that it's not a City of London versus Middlesex County issue. It's a City of London and Middlesex County issue.
Yep, go ahead.
Just one more thing on this. Actually, I'm going to read you a direct quote. I've talked to some pretty high level folks and on this topic, and here's a direct quote. Oh, I hear you, Bill, on that part too, but MCSS unfortunately doesn't share the same perspective. That tells me a whole bunch of things. It tells me, one, Kelly's exactly right. They want to make it a city versus county thing. It's not. The other thing, though, that it tells me is that MCSS is looking at us like we're still back in 1998. This is not the same county by a long shot. It's not even the same county as it was just 5 years ago in terms of how much we've grown with all our childcare needs and all of our needs. We are not the same need. And so to have funding allocations that are based on, 25-year-old formulas is just nuts. So we've got a lot of work to do now. Unfortunately, this is much harder work because you have to distill it down into explaining to the public how much they're being disadvantaged by this. But we're left with no choice. So I appreciate Joanne raising it, and I can assure everyone that it is very, very high on everyone's radar.
And I just want to say, I want to thank Cindy for her hard work because she's had this problem, this problem on her radar for years now. Is starting to gain some traction, has really worked well with the city to develop a good rapport where it's easy to talk about these things and be able to work towards change. So I want to thank you for that, Cindy. Any other questions before we move on? Looks like we're okay.
Okay, thanks. So we're done social services. We're on to the next budget, which is transportation. So if you have any questions on transportation, I'm going to let Chris answer those.
Any questions? Councillor DeVete?
Just one quick question, which probably didn't even come up during our deliberations. Given the price of gas, for example, the impacts to your budget, how much cushion are we looking at in there, given that petroleum is the basis of a lot of the stuff that you do, not just driving, but driving on it kind of thing?
Yeah, through the warden, it's going to affect everything we do. We included an increase, I believe about 4% in our material and fuel costs. That's going to get blown out of the water pretty quickly. We also are looking at a pretty significant increase to our asphalt tender costs because of the asphalt cement price index adjustment that we've included in those tenders for a number of years. It's funny enough, just yesterday, some of my colleagues across the province were bantering around with some of the hot mix asphalt producers, and they're, right now I think we're about $950 a ton for asphalt cement, and they're telling us it's going to be north of $1,500 this summer. So that's going to have a significant impact on our asphalt contract costs. We have adjusted our equipment rates. As you know, we do job cost accounting here at the county, so we've done some changes already to what we're charging ourselves for the use of our equipment. And the large part of that change is really directly related to what we're going to be expending on diesel fuel this summer. And again, when we prepared this budget, we couldn't have imagined in our wildest dreams what's happening in the Ukraine today. So that's had a significant impact across the planet with regards to oil costs. So again, it's so hard to say, but this is the reason why we have healthy reserves in roads. We're prepared for these kinds of eventualities, and we'll make those adjustments in our budget in future years. But again, I think we're all hoping and praying for a quick resolution in Eastern Europe. But failing that, we will come back to council on a regular basis this summer with our monthly or end of month reconciliation of our accounts and let you know where things are going as far as those impacts overall to all of our capital programs. I think everyone around this table uses the same type of contract language, so we'll all be negatively affected by the cost of oil going forward this summer.
Okay. Any other question? Seeing none, we'll move on.
So thanks very much, Mr. Trainee. And we're on to the next one, which is land ambulance. And again, we have the chief that can answer any questions.
Any questions for the chief? See.
So thanks. The next one up is library. And I know that Lindsay's behind me. So if you have any questions, Lindsay Brock can answer those.
Any questions for Lindsay? See.
That's it. Okay. That is all of them. So that is the budget for 2022.
Okay, Councillor Vanderhooyd.
I just want to thank everyone on the committee for putting the budget together, and Cindy and your team. I mean, it's a big job, and it's interesting to read the numbers and see it when it's all put together. Usually I attend one or two of the meetings, but that wasn't available to me this year. So I because I was busy, but I really appreciate the work you've done. The one thing that you kind of said off the top that, growth and assessment buildup is good for the county because we get more dollars coming in. But at the lower level, and this is for my community, I'm speaking, growth is very costly. Growth is extremely costly in the requirement for new roads and sidewalks and EMS, or not EMS, fire. And you get to that balance where all of a sudden the balance is the wrong way because the assessment doesn't cover everything. And so just wanted to highlight that because it's different at the county level than it is at the local level. And we're really happy that we have growth, but growth is very expensive.
Thank you, Councillor, or sorry, CEO Rayburn.
I almost got a pay cut there.
Yeah.
I really want to thank Joanne for mentioning that because this is something we struggled with this year, probably more than any year that I've been here, because we had growth so fast and the assessment, the real growth, the new development did not catch up with it. And so we're out of sync by a long shot, but it's not only the growth, it's the type of growth we've had. It's affected in all our different populations because all our different service areas, because demographically, it's a little older growth, which has an impact upon, we know that has an impact upon our ambulance costs. And demographically, it's also younger families, which has an impact upon our child. The cheapest group is the group in the middle. And that's not the growth that we've had. We've had it at both extremes. And from a service perspective, that's libraries, that's childcare, that's social services, that's a whole pile of things, including social housing. So Joanne's exactly right. We are, this is a year where we struggled with that particular problem, the lag. And also the fresh problem we're going to have next year is, I think we'll catch up with that growth next year. And you're going to have all this new growth revenue come in next year. But in the meantime, this year, there is definitely a lag and a little bit of last year too. Thank goodness for a lot of the COVID dollars and other things that have been coming in, the other supports that have been coming in to help cover that off. But you're going to have a different problem next year when you finally get that revenue that's coming in. And that was part of the budget committee's thinking for how they structured the budget this year. I just wanted everybody to be aware of that.
Councillor Vader.
One last question, and this is on Strathcona Lodge, the loan for the build. And I don't remember reading it. I probably did, but I just can't remember the numbers. How much do we still owe on it? And at what point does paying it off not cost us too much so that we can actually put those dollars into reserves for further builds?
Thank you for that question. I don't have that right in front of me, but I do have an answer because I have been working with Wayne and legal. So if you'd like, I can come back with kind of a little bit of a formal report for the March 22nd meeting. Okay, we will be ready for that. Like I said, we've had conversation.
Okay. And I do think, one of the things that we talked about when we did the budget committee was how useful the modernization funds were and how that was, if the province did anything, that was one of the most valuable things that they did individually for the municipalities, but overall for the county as well. So it was really well used. We do have a recommendation here that the 2022 estimates be approved and that the necessary bylaws be presented to Middlesex County Council at the March 22nd, 2022 meeting. So like a mover for that. Thank you, Councillor Mayhew, seconded by Councillor Elliott. Any other questions or discussion before I call the vote? Seeing none, in favor? Opposed? Seeing none is carried. Thank you. So we will adjourn and we'll be back for